Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating concept from Pastor Chris Myers. We're talking about what it actually takes to reject our natural, everyday self-centeredness and adopt what the Apostle Paul calls the mind of Christ. And the best part, we aren't just looking at abstract pie-in-the-sky concepts today. We are looking at a living, breathing case study dropped right in the middle of the book of Philippians. Let's get right into it. To kick things off, I want you to picture something. Have you ever seen one of those hilarious videos online where someone tells their dog to sit, places a perfectly cooked, juicy steak right on the floor in front of them, says no, and then just walks out of the room? The hidden camera catches the dog just sitting there, visibly shaking, eyes darting everywhere, practically vibrating with the sheer effort of resisting that steak. It is so funny to watch, but honestly, it's funny because it's just so deeply relatable. We know exactly what it feels like to desperately want something, but agonize over whether or not we should take it, you know? It's the ultimate everyday metaphor for our very human struggle with self-centeredness and temptation.
Okay, let's dive into this. That exact tension, doing what we instinctively want versus doing what is actually right, that was exactly what the early church in Philippi was dealing with. Look, they weren't dealing with massive, blatant, scandalous sins. They weren't like the church in Corinth with all that wild drama, and they certainly weren't lazy. They had just sent Paul a huge financial gift. Their issue was way more subtle. They were struggling to just get along because they were caught in that basic tension of human self-interest. They were tracking with their own desires instead of walking in unity.
So to address this, the Apostle Paul does something completely unexpected in his writing. In this brilliant historical anomaly, Paul literally drops his travel itinerary right into the middle of his letter. Normally, Paul saves all that administrative stuff, the whole who is going where logic, for the very last chapter. But in Philippians chapter 2, he suddenly starts talking about sending his companion Timothy to them. Now, if you're just skimming, you might totally miss it. But historically and practically, this is a massive signal. Paul isn't just giving them a calendar update. He's introducing Timothy as a living, breathing case study of what it looks like to reject self-centeredness and actually embody the mind of Christ. And we have to remember, Timothy wasn't just some random assistant. He had this deep, historical connection to their community. He was saved around 49 AD on Paul's first missionary journey. Then, on the second journey, Timothy was right there in the trenches with Paul when the Philippian church was actually planted. He spent weeks, maybe months, ministering to them from day one. And in the years that followed, he made frequent return visits. So when Paul points to Timothy, he's pointing to a guy the Philippians know intimately. He is deeply historically invested in their exact church family. Drawing straight from Pastor Myers' analysis of this text, we can actually map out a really clear three-part roadmap from Timothy's life that teaches us how to reject our own self-centeredness. To be a disciple with the mind of Christ, you need 3 specific habits. Number 1, a genuine concern for people. Number 2, a proven character. And number 3, a commitment to advancing the gospel together. Let's walk through exactly how Timothy lived these out. So, starting right off with habit number 1. Genuine concern for people. Remember, Paul is writing this letter from a literal prison cell. He couldn't just travel to Philippi himself, and he makes this stunning statement. He says that out of all his associates, he has absolutely no one else like Timothy who genuinely cares for the Philippians' welfare. But how do we actually show that kind of genuine concern today? Well, it requires something Pastor Myers calls margin. It is incredibly hard to genuinely care for others if your life is packed to the absolute brim. Now, sure, sometimes a lack of margin is completely unavoidable, like if you have a newborn baby or you're working 2 jobs to get a degree. But let's be honest, often our lack of margin comes from just being perpetually busy with our own interests, or maybe being a bit overly introverted and avoiding people's messy problems, or frankly, just pride. You know, that I don't need help and I won't give help mentality. To truly serve, we have to intentionally build empty space, margin, into our schedules so we can step in when people actually need us. And for the early Christians, this wasn't some optional extra credit assignment. The early church fundamentally believed that every single individual had a divine calling, which included serving their community. Serving wasn't just a nice thing you did on a Saturday afternoon. It was deeply, deeply integrated into their theology. It was the primary way they showed their love and obedience to God. If we claim to have genuine concern but never actually step into someone's need, we kind of have to ask ourselves if that concern is truly genuine at all. Which naturally brings us to habit 2, having proven character. Paul sets this up with a pretty sharp, unsettling rebuke to the other early Christians around him. He says, "For they all seek their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ." Man, think about how heavy that is. These are believers who have supposedly died to themselves, yet they are entirely preoccupied with their own agendas. By contrast, what's really fascinating about Timothy's track record is actually what's completely missing from it. When Paul praises Timothy, he doesn't bring up flashy miracles, he doesn't mention some incredible preaching talent or some elite education. No, the Philippians knew his proven worth because of his consistent background service. He was just faithfully present when Lydia was converted, present when the slave girl was delivered, and present when the jailer believed. His character wasn't about seeking the spotlight. It was about repeatedly, faithfully showing up to serve over the long haul.
So how do we know if we're actually building proven character and serving Christ, or if we're just secretly seeking our own glory? Pastor Myers offers a highly practical, honestly kind of brutal test for our motivation. Ask yourself this: if no one notices, applauds, or posts about it on social media, would I be upset? Ouch, right? It's a piercing question. If we get frustrated when our service goes completely unrecognized, it totally reveals that we're probably doing it for our own notoriety, not out of a proven character that honors Jesus.
And that moves us to our final habit: advancing the gospel together. Timothy beautifully illustrates what true selflessness looks like here. Historically, we know he actually hit pause on his own local ministry in the city of Ephesus, packed up his bags, and went to serve Paul in the church in Philippi. He literally put the broader kingdom ahead of his own personal project. This highlights a really critical contrast: building a single church's kingdom in total isolation versus building Christ's kingdom through real partnership. It is so ridiculously easy for communities to become isolated and competitive, but true gospel advancement, it requires collaboration. Pastor Myers talks about how his own local congregation, Dwell City Church, actively partners across city lines. They host collective worship nights with musicians from different congregations. They gather pastors from various local churches to just pray together. When you have the mind of Christ, you realize you aren't trying to build your own little isolated empire. You're teaming up with others to build Christ's kingdom.
And this collaborative spirit applies just as much to our personal, everyday lives. The Puritan writer Richard Baxter hit the nail on the head when he wrote, "It is a mercy to have so near a friend to be a helper to your soul, to join with you in prayer, to watch over you, and to tell you of your sins and dangers." It's just like going to the gym. If you try to work out entirely on your own, maybe you last a month. But if you have a workout partner waiting for you at the door, your consistency absolutely skyrockets. We drastically increase our spiritual success when we cultivate close gospel friendships and really work together in small groups.
And this brilliantly illustrates the entire climax of Paul's logic in the book of Philippians. It is a perfect one-to-one mapping. In chapter 1, Paul lays out the theology: live worthy, work together, reject selfish ambition, and look out for others. Then, in chapter 2, instead of just repeating those ideas, he gives them Timothy's practical actions. Timothy's proven character, that is living worthy. His serving in the gospel is working together. Seeking Christ's interest is rejecting selfish ambition. And his genuine concern is the exact definition of looking out for others. The theology literally maps perfectly onto the lived reality of Timothy's life. So we've seen that the mind of Christ isn't just some abstract idea to think about. It's a blueprint to be lived out. And it begs a really fascinating question. If a 2,000-year-old letter can so accurately diagnose our modern struggles with self-interest, what would our communities look like today if we actually prioritized margin, character, and collaboration over our own personal agendas? What is one commitment you're going to make this week to reject self-centeredness? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.